Good evening. Welcome to our Bible study tonight. Tonight we are continuing our series of looking at people in the Bible that we know a lot about. There are many characters in the Bible who we know very little about, like Enoch. We only know that he walked with God, but there are those that we know a lot about, and we need to pay very special attention to them because the truths that come from their stories can be so impactful. So we're continuing tonight in Dr. Claypool's book, Glad Reunion, looking at the person of Jacob, who is one of those folks that we know a whole lot about. I want to begin by telling you that when I was teaching high school history, my students were always most interested in studying the 1960s because of all the social upheaval that was happening during that time. And I think everyone would agree that those same kinds of things are happening now. We're living through a time of just a whole lot of social unrest. And it is so interesting that he begins this particular study on Jacob by citing someone who had a really interesting insight on the 1960s. Listen to this, it is so true today regarding the 1960s, but it's so true today. He says, every significant institution in our society was caught in a brutal crossfire between uncritical lovers and unloving critics. On the one hand were the utterly naive who saw nothing at all wrong with our country and responded defensively to any criticism, saying, America, love it or leave it. And at the other extreme were those who were totally negative about society. Burn, baby, burn was their proposal for only in bringing down every existing structure and starting all over again could the unloving critics see any hope for the future. Does that not absolutely capture what is going on right now? It really is incredible. Unloving, uncritical lovers and unloving critics. And he says neither of these extremes were healthy. He says a human individual or corporate reality, such as a nation, do not flourish under either absolute approval or wholesale condemnation. What they need, rather, is proper blending of realism and hope. I love that. That is so true to what we need right now. We need a blending of realism and hope. And he says such a blending would amount to what might be called discerning loving. That is what we need now. What we need is a love for our country, for each other, but also to discern how we need to move forward. That's what gives us this blend of reality and hope. And this is so true to how the Bible engages us. He says the human beings of the Bible are treated with both honesty and hopefulness, and nowhere is this approach more evident than in the way our ancestor Jacob is depicted. He's depicted warts and all. At sometimes he's trustworthy, at sometimes he's very deceptive, remarkably courageous, and yet also susceptible to cowardliness. And so we should get great assurance from the Bible when it comes to the way that Jacob is related to us. And we realize that God is willing to work with someone like him, and God is certainly willing to work with people like us. So the first characteristic that he deals with is how Jacob was always running from them, running from things. Escapism was his only solution to solve anything in a practical sense. And he says, when escaping from something is one's only concern, if that's all we're concerned with is running from something, then we rarely pay attention to the situation in which we are fleeing, and the new situation turns out to be worse than the original one. I can't tell you how many times I've had this conversation with people that they run from, usually it's a job or a relationship, and they end up finding themselves in the same situation because they never really dealt with what the real deal was. And that's exactly what we see in the early story of Jacob. Jacob's name in Hebrew literally means trickster. He's forever getting into situations that he needed to get out of fast. But something happened to Jacob when he fled from Laban and heard that his brother Esau, whom he had defrauded, was coming to meet him with 400 armed men. Somehow the escapist grew up and Jacob stopped running. In other words, he was finally going to face up to his past. And says he accepted the fact that many times the only way out is the way through. That's just how life is. We can't go around those big things that come up our life. We have to face the music. And so Jacob found himself in that famous story by the river Jabbok, where he was wrestling with a manifestation of God himself. Was it an angel? Was it God himself? Was it his brother Esau? We're not told. The truth of the matter is the truth behind it of what is important is that he was no longer an invader. He was willing to face up, and if you'll remember the story, he said to this being, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. In other words, he finally found himself in a place in life where he was determined to learn what had to be learned. And that is what we should all emulate. The good news really does come by facing the bad news. He says Jacob also demonstrated that he was capable of learning from life. It is possible to fail forward. That's how we learn. Yet for all the growing that Jacob did, in another area, he never did learn. And this was in how he treated his sons. He was favorable to two of his sons, Joseph and Benjamin. And if you'll remember, his parents did the same thing to him. Rebekah favored him. His father favored Esau. And isn't it absolutely unbelievable how this happens so often in life, that people end up repeating those things and passing it down from generation to generation. And this is what happened to him. He made the same mistake himself and proceeded to work the same kind of havoc among his own children that happened between him and his brother. And this is, Dr. Claypool says, this is what I love about the biblical writers. They were neither uncritical lovers or unloving critics, especially in the story of Jacob, or they would not have told the whole story. Jacob never did achieve perfect consistency in life, but God did not let go of him or abandon him for this reason. And this is the good news for all of us. God has not given up on us either. If we are still breathing, which is what he describes as the most tangible sacrament of hope, from this flows the courage to keep on growing. Now listen to the insight that he has at this point. I absolutely love the way that he words this. He says, no attempt is made then to gloss over Jacob's inconsistencies, nor are his mistakes swept under the rug or kept out of sight. What happened to Jacob is what happens to all of us. He was most tempted at points of his greatest strengths, not at the point of his weaknesses. We make a mistake to think too dualistically about good and evil, as if all of one reality is over here and the other reality is over there. The truth is that good and evil are subtly intertwined, which means that precisely where I can do my best work is also where I am capable of doing the most harm. Any virtue pushed too far can become a vice, and this is vividly illustrated in the person of Jacob. I absolutely love how he describes that. It is the fact that good and evil are not totally separate from each other, but are subtly intertwined. Any virtue or strength overdone becomes a vice, which is a warning to all of us to be especially careful of our greatest giftedness. I've seen this in my own life. I have a gift of words and a gift to speak, and that can be such a blessing. But I could also use that gift to tear people down, and I have to be very careful not to allow that to happen. He says, who can read all the way through the story of Jacob and not see the most glorious truth of all, that God somehow can write straight with crooked lines? Isn't that beautiful? While it is clear throughout the biblical story that God never wills evil, he is capable of using evil ingeniously to move forward towards goals of good. Isn't that a message that we need to hear in our society right now? He says that is our final hope, is it not? What God can do with what we have done to bring order out of chaos and astonishing good out of incredible evil. Second only to creating something out of nothing is God's power to recycle events, to take what was meant for evil and to somehow pick up the pieces and fashion something good out of it all. He ends by where he started, talking about all the social upheaval in the 1960s. It is so true to what is happening in our country today. And he says the 1960s, and we would say 2020, almost exploded because of the crossfire between uncritical lovers and unloving critics. Neither one of these extremes is good for living things. What we need is a blend of the two: realism and hope, honesty about the way we are, but optimism about what we can become. That is a beautiful lesson for each of us as individuals, and it is a lesson for what our country needs right now. We need realism to look at who we have become, and we need hope that we can become better. We are better than this, and there's better days ahead. Go in peace.